The way in which we are currently teaching the Analects is primarily and mainly aimed at people who reside in the secular world. Some of you may possess a background in Buddhist teachings, or perhaps have studied certain subjects more deeply and extensively, and therefore possess a truly solid and firm foundation. So there may be some parts that are not particularly easy for you to accept, but in fact in today's world, we still need to proceed in this way. Therefore, the way we will discuss the Analects from now on will be a little different from our regular classes. With that in mind, let us carry on with the Analects and continue from where we left off. Everyone is quite familiar with the renowned Analects of Confucius. We have already finished discussing the first chapter, Shui Er. Now we are moving on to the chapter, Wei Zheng. As for the Wei Zheng chapter, it also contains many dialogues between Confucius and his students. In some cases, it is not clear where Confucius was, or with whom he was actually conversing. These specific details are not readily obvious. Where it is quite clear, some of these details are explained in other commentaries on the text. Some of them provide further, more detailed clarification. So, for this particular session, we will primarily focus on Confucius himself, exploring the profound teachings of the Analects that were developed at that significant time. We, as individuals, use our own wisdom to fully understand, carefully explore, and thoroughly study them, and then thoughtfully draw our own conclusions. At first glance, it may seem like just a few sentences here and there. When I see it translated into Tibetan, it is broken up into segments. If no one explains it, it may be that we truly don't quite grasp what is being said. Reading it directly in Tibetan can be even harder to understand. Yet, once we present it in Chinese, you will see that every one of its teachings still carries a deep and profoundly meaningful insight. Nowadays, many people, including a significant number of young people in China, genuinely feel that the profound ideas and teachings found in Confucius' Analects seem to be quite distant and somewhat removed from the realities of the 21st century, perceiving that there is a significant gap and indeed some notable barriers, so they find it hard to relate to. Some people even think, indeed, that these ancient, deeply rooted traditional ideas are somewhat naive or perhaps even outdated, and that they simply can't be effectively applied to modern real life, that they are somewhat rigid and perhaps even dogmatic in their approach, and that religious ideas are constantly and persistently restricting people's bodies and minds, thereby limiting their full potential. So, in today's especially open, interconnected, and truly free world, you most probably don't necessarily need to learn this text. There are quite a few people who hold this view. Actually, this kind of thinking is also worth examining. However, everyone's understanding and interpretation of their own ideas, or their perception of what constitutes right and wrong, and what is truly reasonable or utterly unreasonable, can vary significantly and is often quite subjective. It is also significantly influenced by the prevailing cultural background of their specific era. And some of the cultural norms at that particular time, what we might consider to be inherently right and proper, may not necessarily be seen as right by others. Just like we discussed the other day, there was indeed a remarkable hero among the noble Shakya clan who valiantly killed so many of King Virudhaka's formidable soldiers. If we carefully look at it from today's modern values and ethical standards, at least the people of his own country would probably think this was something truly quite remarkable indeed. From a worldly perspective, it is indeed very impressive and quite remarkable. He should have been awarded for it, but at that time the Shakya clan believed that he had brought disgrace to their race, so they didn't allow him to stay in the country. If we look at cultures around the world, we can observe many interesting aspects. If some people at the time couldn't accept it, then many people would also feel that this was a disgrace, something that should be rejected. Such thinking has existed all the way up to the present day, looking back to former eras. For example, when people bared much of the body or wore particularly thin clothing, it was already an issue of concern in those days, even in fact during the Tang dynasty itself. People had a very negative view of this. They would say she was shameless. But in modern society, from the perspective of values in some places, this is considered to be truly very meaningful indeed. And people often use many glowing adjectives and profound words of praise and admiration for her. So perhaps from the detailed perspective of a meticulous practitioner, some specific places or environments may indeed seem very unclean, unhygienic, or even utterly filthy and squalid. But from the viewpoint of a non-practitioner, these things are considered very beautiful. So everyone's values are different. Even when it comes to Confucian thought, in the eyes of certain people, it is very meaningful for every aspect of our daily lives. It is very significant. If people have no restraint and are always indulgent, just as it is described in the chapter on non-negligence, there will be many faults. It may be very difficult to get through life. One might even give up halfway, but there are also some who believe that if things continue this way, it is actually very reasonable. So, some of these perspectives are indeed those of various politicians offering their unique viewpoints on the matter. For example, for us religious people, someone might be considered a very good practitioner, but a politician might see this person as very bad. There are also, for example, scientists who might think this is an expert, a very focused person. But on the other hand, people from the arts and culture world might see this person as very conservative and rigid, always looking gloomy and feeling that there's no real meaning. So in our complex world, whether something is truly right or inherently wrong, or genuinely reasonable or entirely unreasonable, when carefully analyzed from different intricate value systems, the results we obtain are also quite different and distinct. Therefore, when it comes to the profound Confucian culture, in fact, everyone should wisely use their own inherent wisdom to stand from a truly fair and impartial perspective, and then meticulously analyze things in great detail. In this process, one must repeatedly reflect and think for oneself. It's not about thinking something is good just because others say it's good, or thinking something is bad just because others say it's bad. Actually, this means you lack your own opinions. Mipham Rinpoche, in The Beacon of Certainty, repeatedly emphasizes that we truly need to engage in this very kind of analysis. Only the certainty that comes from analysis is true wisdom. If there is no analysis, and the so-called wisdom is just based on one's own personal faith, in reality this is truly a kind of false wisdom. It's not genuine wisdom, it's called pseudo-wisdom. So when we properly study the Analects of Confucius, I also hope that everyone will not approach it from a Buddhist perspective, nor from a Confucian perspective. Instead, you should stand from your own position as a human being, especially as those of us who are engaged in study and contemplation. Many of you here have finished studying Buddhist logic, right? If you have completed the study of Buddhist logic, then you are certainly approaching it from the standpoint of Dharma, Kirti, and Dignaga, from the most ultimate perspective of observing the truth of reality, to conduct analysis. At this particular point in time, you can then simply say, regarding Confucius' way of thinking, what kind of depth does it truly possess? Of course, Confucius's philosophy is primarily and mainly applicable to worldly matters and the practicalities of human existence. As for the transcendent teachings about all-encompassing great compassion or the doctrine of non-referential emptiness, these are indeed not addressed. But I have always felt that the most distinctive feature of Confucius in Buddhism, it is profoundly taught that the Buddha expounded the sacred Dharma according to the varying capacities of different sentient beings. The Buddha also compassionately turned the 84,000 Dharma wheels, which represent countless teachings. The 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel, or the 12 divisions of the scriptures, all were taught according to the different aptitudes of sentient beings. So Confucius also spoke differently to different people. This is something everyone should always carefully observe and consider. When we answer a question, it is important to properly formulate our response. For the same question, we should give different answers to different people. This is very important. A more skillful and experienced doctor, when he encounters different patients, he won't prescribe the same medicine to everyone, right? Unless there are some general medicines, a kind of universal prescription. Those general medicines might be prescribed because they are somewhat beneficial to everyone. But generally speaking, for them, for example, some people really need to have a certain level of, depending on their different physical conditions. Some need vitamin C, some need vitamin B. Some people indeed need different medicines and analyzes based on their blood lipids, calcium levels, and so on. So after we study the Analects in the future, at the very least, we should have this kind of mindset that when different people, 2 people or 10 people or more, ask different questions, and you will need to respond to them accordingly. And when you answer, you must base it on their thinking, interests, and inclinations. This is indeed very important. So some of our Dharma teachers, no matter where they go to give talks, they use the same approach when speaking to scholars, and also use the same method when speaking to beginner Buddhists. This is very unreasonable. I remember in the past, His Holiness, once during an Amitabha Dharma assembly, we assigned some Khenpos from our side to explain the merits of the Pure Land to the attendees. One Khenpo at that particular time used the profound three-point reasoning method from Buddhist logic. Later, His Holiness said in class, "Such cause for such reason, such like such." If you speak like this, these ordinary people simply don't understand. Why is it like this? We should explain things to them in especially simple and easy to understand worldly terms to guide them. This is very important. So for those of us here, on the one hand, when we are chatting with other people in our daily lives, or when we talk to them, or when we are trying to help them, for example, when you are talking with your doctor, you should use the medical knowledge you know to explain things to them. Then if you are interacting with a scholar, use scholarly language to explain things to them. If the person you are dealing with is a farmer, then talk to them about the things farmers care about, like farming, planting various crops, the weather, seedling cultivation, and so on. Use these important topics to communicate with them. This is extremely, extremely important if we want to study the Analects, and later when we give big talks or turn the wheel of Dharma. We should also speak according to the capacities of sentient beings. Even in small things like our daily conversations or meetings, we must always pay attention to the situation at hand, right? What is the overall atmosphere of the moment? What is the situation at that moment like? So, some of us might go to different schools, or to different companies, or to different groups of people, and we should speak to them in a way that truly suits their specific needs. Before doing that, you need to understand the other person's interests and their level of intelligence. This is very important. If you don't know anything about them, for example, when we talk about exams now, there are many things I don't know either. If I don't know, then I have no idea what their main strengths are. What is their educational background like? That day I asked them that each person should have a detailed record. For example, how much this person has studied, how long they have actually been present here, how many years they have been ordained, and what kinds of books they usually read and study. But later it seemed that the registration on the women's side was a bit brief. Everyone just said which class they were in. In the past, our registration was more detailed. At the very least, it included which topics of logic and which precepts you had studied. Then during the process of the exam, I also noticed that this person studied these subjects. It should be able to tell from his words and actions that it is related to his profession, his studies, and his level of expertise. So I think for all of us here, in any situation in the future, we shouldn't generalize everything across the board. We shouldn't all speak in precisely the same format. That would be very unreasonable and restrictive. Perhaps this fundamental idea is mainly what the ancient philosopher Confucius was talking about. So today let's continue our discussion. Actually, the context in which language is used is very important. The method of doing things is also very important. At any time as a person, it is crucial to consider this aspect. This is extremely important within such a social group. If someone truly doesn't fully understand the underlying context, then no matter how much they talk and boast, in the end it doesn't really benefit others very much at all. This is very important. Next, let's talk about when Zigong asked about the gentleman. Confucius said, "Let your actions precede your words, and then follow up with your words." This statement refers to Zigong. He was very eloquent, whether it was his public speaking or his profound wisdom. He excelled in these areas. But when it came to actually doing things, he wasn't quite as impressive as he made himself out to be. Among us people, some individuals speak well and also perform actions well. Some neither speak well nor do things well. Some speak very well, but don't do so well when it comes to action. Some may not speak that well, but they do things exceptionally well. As the letter to relatives and friends states, people are like the amra fruit, used to distinguish 4 types: those who mature internally and those who mature externally. Indeed, there are such differences in people's words, actions, and behavior. So here it very says, Zigong once asked, what exactly did he ask of Confucius? He asked, what exactly is a junzi, a noble and truly exemplary person. What is the concept of a junzi? What is the definition of a junzi? He asked this question. Confucius thoughtfully replied, "First act, then follow with your carefully considered words." In fact, a true junzi, noble person, before taking on anything, he should go ahead and do whatever is truly within his ability, accomplish that first, and only then talk about it afterward. After that, he continues to practice it. Usually it's not about talking first, boasting about how well one can do something. And then when it actually comes time to do it, it seems especially pitiful, doing absolutely nothing at all. It definitely shouldn't be like that, because in this particular instance, Zigong was very proficient at talking, but not so good at actually doing things. So he was told to act first, to understand things through direct action. If you wait until you have actually achieved some real tangible results and then speak, that's a bit better. Of course, different disciples are not all the same. Some people might prefer to prepare thoroughly first, like drafting plans, designing or making arrangements, and then start to act. But when it truly comes to actually doing anything really concrete at all, it's not about boasting extravagantly at the start or talking things up to sound especially impressive, only to be extremely inefficient when it comes to actually doing it and basically accomplishing nothing. Such a person is not a noble person, but rather a petty person, because he talks a good game at first, but when it comes time for him to actually do it, everyone ends up feeling very discouraged. They think, wow, this person talked so incredibly well back then. In our everyday lives, we often find that this really does happen. There are some people, every time there's a meeting or a discussion, they consistently talk about crucial data, their background, their overarching vision, the reasons behind things and so on, and even make their PPT presentations sound especially impressive. Especially now, with software you can download online and then put together some proposals. It's actually pretty easy. It's not that hard. But later on, if you actually do it this way, that's great. If you keep doing it like this, after a few weeks or few months, things are still the same. That's because when it comes to words written down on paper, it all tends to sound especially impressive and convincing when you explain it to others. But beyond that, in reality, nothing truly real actually gets done. So, in the past, Master Uyi wisely said, "Speaking a yard is not as good as actually walking an inch. No matter how well we may indeed talk, it's actually quite truly useless. What matters is that we actually do it. We need to be genuine, say what we mean, and follow through with action. After you've said something, you have to back it up with action, right? Once you've finished talking, you should actually take real steps to do it. It's not about learning a lot. Putting it into practice is what matters most. This is also mentioned in the Dhammapada Sutra of parables. It's okay if you haven't learned a lot, but what's most important is your actual practice. That's the most important thing. It's fine if you haven't learned much or done much. It's fine if you haven't thought about it much either. But what really matters is actually doing something concrete. So I've also encountered many people, including some individuals who are very devoted, who always speak very well at meetings. I once met a truly devoted person who spoke to me privately, explaining what our current management model is like and what the future plans are, and in that way, a few years later, what kind of significant results will be achieved in terms of management and promoting the Dharma. At the time, I really thought this person was remarkable. So some of the original people who weren't that good at speaking were replaced, and he was put in charge. When made the person in charge at first, it seemed he did well for a while, but later things got worse and worse. At that point, many people said, he's someone who can talk but never actually does anything. So some of us really are, like Zigong, who was truly especially eloquent, especially those individuals who are very much articulate in front of others. Indeed, when they speak, it seems like they're quite especially powerful. Then they begin to discuss and elaborate upon all sorts of fundamental principles. With this, others gradually gain a profound sense of confidence in them. After people have truly developed this deep and unwavering confidence, everyone genuinely starts to believe in you. But in the very end, you just absolutely cannot succeed at all. So, people often call this being a giant in words, but a dwarf in action. There's this saying, when it comes to speaking, you often sound as though you were a mighty and incredibly powerful giant. Yet when it comes to truly carrying out the real tasks, your performance appears quite disappointing, and in fact such cases happen rather frequently. Of course, at the very beginning, In the Mahayana Buddhist practice of the 6 perfections and 4 means of embracing, we first speak some pleasant and welcoming and kind words to win others over, and this is indeed necessary. It's important to gain everyone's trust and establish credibility. After genuine honesty and mutual trust have been firmly established, only then do they begin to take action and proceed with their plans. In the era of Shangyang's reform, there was in fact a man who, right at the very beginning, also followed this very same approach. It was like the 7 warring states back then, and at that time the Qin state didn't seem all that powerful. At that time, Shangyang was implementing his reforms. At first he didn't have the capability to do so, but later Shangyang came up with an idea. He told the people at that particular time that there was a certain very specific tree in a particular place indeed. And if someone moved it to another location in the city, he would give them 10 taels of gold. Later he said it would be 50 taels of gold. At first, absolutely no one truly believed him, but then eventually someone did indeed believe him. After believing, he actually carried it out in practice. He fulfilled his promise. After fulfilling his promise, many people began to have confidence in him. Once they had confidence, these people gradually started to gather around him. So when it comes to politicians, since ancient times, whether it's by real or fake means or tricks, they need to find a way to inspire confidence in everyone. Once people have this confidence, then he can effectively go on to achieve his personal goals. Such observable phenomena do indeed exist, but as for this specific kind of method, in our considered view, maintaining a strong consistency between words and actions is very important. Moreover, in anything that we do, we must first establish trustworthiness. Then we communicate through our words, and then we take action. Or you can simply do it yourself first, and then show others. And after you've done it, it's not too late to talk about it. Many people, when they do things, prefer to do it first, and only after it's done do they tell you about it. Actually, this approach is also very good. Everyone feels that this person is especially eloquent when speaking, but when it comes to doing things, they really can't do it. This seems like a very simple matter. But whether it's about one's own practice, spreading Dharma, and helping others builds trust, it truly brings a significant sense of trust and firm confidence. So whatever we express, our words indeed must count. After we have spoken, we must always, without exception, diligently keep our word. This is incredibly important. It may seem like these are things everyone understands in the world, but when it comes to actually doing them, perhaps except for sages, not everyone is necessarily able to fully and effectively put them into practical application. Therefore, in some Buddhist teachings, these important topics are also frequently and extensively addressed, including the Sakya aphorisms, the Shuimu aphorisms, and the advice for rulers. These are important in our daily lives. They are important, whether it is conducting oneself or handling affairs, dealing with people and interacting with the world. These are important in our human world. Some people, although they practice diligently and possess great wisdom, their personal discipline is also very pure, but often they are not very good at dealing with people or handling affairs. In their state of realization, these things seem very simple. Profound meanings like those in the middle way, or the emptiness of prajna, or the deep, luminous and equal nature described in Vajrayana teachings. These are things that interest me. As for worldly matters, everyone understands them, but on the other hand, they look down on this knowledge. After looking down on this knowledge, in the very end, it's still fundamentally about how you conduct yourself as a person truly. They often don't realize it themselves and end up making a mess of things. Some people think they really understand. Some people believe that they shouldn't have any problems in this area. But in the end, whether it's people from ancient times or modern times, it truly is. Everyone has a certain set of rules. These rules include the ultimate truth, but let's just set that aside for now. This kind of ultimate truth is discussed in the 5 great treatises and other profound Buddhist texts. But as for worldly rules, no matter what ethnicity a person is, these cannot be violated. If you do violate them, you might not realize it yourself, but others will notice. So as we continue to live and exist in this ever-evolving world, we need to understand these rules. Nowadays, we commonly refer to this as international etiquette, or what we now more broadly define as essential social knowledge. These are fundamental principles and understandings that every individual should thoroughly comprehend and internalize. Actually, sometimes when we look back at Laozi and Confucius from over 2,500 years ago, many young people scoff at them, thinking, what do they know? When they hear the words of Confucius, it seems like, but in reality, if you truly observe, even up to today, although it's not as profound as what the Buddha taught, not containing all those various inner and outer esoteric meanings, maybe it doesn't have those, but at least in the worldly sense, his words still hold true. We could easily spend a long time explaining just one of his sentences, and there would be absolutely no problem with that. So if we carefully examine things in detail and truly dig into the meaning behind them, there are definitely many aspects worth learning from. Next, Confucius said, the gentleman is harmonious but does not form cliques. The petty person forms cliques but is not harmonious. Then, regarding the noble gentleman, Confucius further explained in detail what exactly is a gentleman truly like, and what is a petty, small-minded person truly like. In Confucius' profound words, for example, the gentleman is always broad-minded and open-hearted, while the petty person is perpetually anxious and constantly worried. There are many other similar expressions like these examples that can be found. The meaning of the gentleman is broad-minded is that, in general, a noble person tends to be more tolerant and inclusive, with an open heart that is upright, honest, and magnanimous in every way, whereas a petty person is always calculating, forever preoccupied with gains and losses, and constantly troubled in mind. Sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're not. So in fact, these are truly indeed many excellent and valuable maxims. Indeed, when we interact with people in daily life, some people are very happy one moment and then quite unhappy the very next, just like the unpredictable weather in spring. Why do they suddenly, for no reason? Some, of course, do have heart conditions, and if it's a heart condition, there's nothing that can be done. If my heart isn't healthy, the people around me need to be careful. I'm about to explode. This kind of situation is quite common. Some people don't have heart problems, but for some reason they're just unhappy today. It's like they're about to erupt like thunder at any moment. Some people, on the other hand, are excessively and overtly happy. Why are they grinning with such a wide smile for no apparent reason all of the time? Generally, when it comes to petty people, their mindset is unstable. One moment they're happy, the next they're upset, or their actions are constantly changing in all sorts of ways. But for a true gentleman, whether it's his overall state, his spoken words, or his fundamental mindset, they are all remarkably consistent, day in and day out. Consequently, people generally feel that this individual is very reliable. He isn't someone who keeps changing all the time. This is often referenced in many other contexts as well, and it's exactly the same here. A gentleman associates without forming cliques, while a petty person forms cliques without truly associating. So what does this mean? A gentleman is comprehensive. Comprehensive here means broad and all-encompassing. It means he is inclusive of everything. He doesn't get caught up in petty personal matters and start nitpicking, getting hung up or feeling distressed. That's not how he is. A true gentleman generally looks at things from a much bigger, more encompassing, and overall perspective. He has a certain elevated level of awareness and thoughtful consideration for the entire whole. But within smaller, more specific matters, he never pays excessive attention to them, nor does he ever feel any sense of jealousy or harbor any deep-seated resentment. He simply does not engage in such emotions or behaviors. As for a petty person, he is partial and not comprehensive. A petty person every day lives within the confines of his own small ego. He doesn't pay any attention at all to the broader, universal principles. He tends to be quite selfish. A true gentleman, on the other hand, is very much altruistic. For example, in the profound commentary by Master Wu Yi, he explains in his commentary, in his notes on the Analects, truly, he says that a gentleman possesses a heart of great compassion and is very kind to all sentient beings. He doesn't fuss over trivial matters. He simply doesn't act that way. Whereas a petty person lacks compassion. He only has a selfish, self-serving heart. This narrow, self-centered scope brings suffering to both himself and others. So, the explanation given here include comprehensive but not partial, zhou erbu bi. I saw in the Tibetan version it says Zhou signifies unity, and regarding not partial, it is important to note that there are in fact two distinct versions in Tibetan. In one of these versions it explicitly states but anyway, it really sounds like everyone is completely united. There won't be any kind of collusion or anything like that at all. But perhaps this way of explaining it, since everyone has their own way of interpreting things, anyone can offer an explanation. But according to Master Uyi's explanation, a gentleman truly has a truly very broad vision and stands very tall indeed. He thinks things through thoroughly. Zhou means thoroughness, which is good, whereas a petty person only ever considers his own immediate interests or those of his very close relatives and immediate family, or people he has a good relationship with. It's always like this. So now, in any given group or organization within society, if the designated leader is truly responsible, then they should indeed play the crucial role of a gentleman. They won't be thinking only about themselves. At most, they might consider their own family and relatives, or those they have a closer relationship with. But a true gentleman nowadays, for example, if I am a gentleman, a leader, when I assign people to tasks, I look for those who have wisdom, ability, and talent, and let these people handle things. That's how it should be. But if I am not a gentleman, but a petty person, then the people around me, even if they lack wisdom or are very jealous, then their abilities are also quite weak. So the difference between a gentleman and a petty person is still truly quite obvious in many ways. This includes the current leaders in society, and the people around each leader. Their situations are all very different. Some leaders possess a certain degree of wisdom, and they are exceptionally fair and impartial. All the dedicated staff members surrounding them, they absolutely won't place their trust in someone simply because that individual frequently flatters them or consistently acts in an especially nice and agreeable manner towards them at all times, and then place special trust in them. If that's the case, then the gentleman is doomed. He won't have a good outcome. But if this gentleman makes arrangements based on each person's strengths, each person's wisdom, each individual's unique abilities and advantages, consequently, the gentleman's diligent efforts in his own work and his professional career will undoubtedly be very successful. Moreover, a truly discerning gentleman himself consistently looks at the long term, considering future implications. He would not begin by accepting bribes over trivial matters. Back in the Eastern Han dynasty, there was an official named Wei Zheng who became widely respected as a truly upright and incorruptible magistrate, renowned throughout history as an exemplary model of integrity and honesty. There was someone who treated him especially well and who later wanted to bribe him. He said in the middle of the night, he brought 10 taels of gold, or however much gold it was, and tried to give the gold to him, but Wei Zheng refused to accept it. This person said, "It's fine. It's nighttime now. No one will know. Just go ahead and take it." Wei Zheng replied, "I won't take it, not because no one else knows. Heaven truly knows, the earth also knows, you certainly know, and I myself know. If I were to accept this gift, I wouldn't have a good, and you wouldn't have a good outcome either." So there is a certain undeniable truth to what he profoundly said. He also possessed a certain remarkable dignity about his entire demeanor. So, looking back at that particular period in history, some individuals were indeed quite different from the people we commonly encounter in today's contemporary society. When it comes to the act of accepting bribes, whether it involves hundreds of millions or even tens of millions of currency, back then, the various leaders and officials had their own distinct responsibilities. This situation was completely and utterly different from the notorious Qin Hui of the Southern Song period, who emerged much later on. At that particular time, Qin Hui acted solely for his own personal benefit. He started to accuse him in front of the monarch, accusing him of what exactly? That Yue Fei supposedly had tendencies toward treason, and this was a very serious accusation, and that he had done certain things in some places. He began to pile on many serious charges against him before the reigning monarch. In the end, tragically, the esteemed General Yue Fei was unjustly executed. After he was killed, it was only then that people realized that the real reason was a personal grudge between them, and he actually used this method to bring him down to the ground. The very same thing happens nowadays. Many people often feel quite negatively about certain individuals, especially if they don't particularly like them. Their personal vendettas frequently end up being turned into political attacks, effectively putting a black hat on them. They'll say this person violated some political principle or another. Because when it comes to politics, Whether in ancient times or in the modern era, politicians are always deeply and consistently worried about the potential for rebellion, constantly concerned that their own established position of power isn't sufficiently secure. Whenever their personal status or professional career is even slightly threatened, they'll absolutely stop at nothing to suppress all of their efforts or destroy the other party. So this kind of phenomenon, if it's a petty person, they'll keep this matter hidden in their heart all along. And then, when the opportune moment is truly right, they'll deliberately frame or harm the other person. This kind of thing has happened countless times since ancient times. Nowadays, many of us who are monastics are relatively pure by nature, and your social circle is also quite simple and straightforward. You might genuinely think that everyone in the world believes in karma and cause and effect, that good deeds are rewarded and bad deeds are punished. But in reality, the world isn't like that. Many of our students are still quite innocent when they first leave school. They think their dreams might really come true and that they should contribute something to society. They believe it's possible to change their family and even the world. At first it may seem as though the problem is not particularly serious, but once you step into society, you quickly realize that all the surrounding circles and groups are not really like that, rather resembling, at that time, certain people involved with the Hong Kong underworld. Are still talking about it now. There were a few celebrities at that time, individuals whose considerable wealth was among the very first to be systematically seized. If that initial tactic proved ineffective, they would then resort to employing all kinds of menacing threats, often originating from the notorious triad organizations, threats to their lives. So for some well-known celebrities, after entering society, it seemed like there was no fairness at all, no upright laws to truly rely upon, and that many things truly depended on their inherent power, and all sorts of elaborate schemes and cunning tricks they consistently and effectively used, which ended up harming both society and individuals. So as for the whole world, it's not as beautiful as we imagine it to be. It's not really like what people in this world truly believe, often claim, emphasizing comprehensive development, individual freedom, and social fairness. Of course, there are also many genuinely positive aspects and beneficial outcomes that should be acknowledged and considered. And we truly can't look at the entire world entirely from a pessimistic perspective. But indeed, in this complex world, we must consider many aspects. There are many things that are not as we might truly imagine them to be. And once you truly know about them, you are often truly shocked to realize that such things can happen in this world. This is not just a small-scale issue. Such phenomena exist within such a large group of people. So regarding this specific point, as long as there are, how should I exactly put it? Within the circles of petty people, there truly arise many kinds of unfair and unreasonable behaviors. And therefore, when we safeguard and protect the Dharma centers, Buddhism likewise insists on the very same principle, following this rule without exception. Some significant aspects of Buddhism, including some of the prominent leaders of various Buddhist centers, are being considered. Regarding these, we also hope that you can become a person of integrity, right? Otherwise, if there are petty people, now this has already become a tradition. Although Confucius spoke about this, the world has changed drastically since then. If some leaders of Dharma centers are wise, they won't, just because of a small matter, immediately replace the people who are below them. They certainly wouldn't do that. But if your own thinking is still quite immature and undeveloped, then it's a different story. If the people who are under you have even a slightly different opinion from the leader, and they bring up a small suggestion, perhaps a minor one or even a subtle one, from then on, you bear a deep grudge against them. And as soon as you get the chance, you immediately replace or dismiss them. This kind of phenomenon still exists today. It even happens among us Buddhists. In some Dharma centers, especially among the main figures, once someone gains power, they start using that power to eliminate all the factors around them that are unfavorable to themselves. But actually, if you are someone with a bit of wisdom, even if others have some different opinions about you, or criticize you in different ways, if you respond with compassion, or with fair and upright wisdom to accept them, there's truly absolutely no need to worry about this at all, indeed. Sometimes when we are managing the monastic community and running Dharma centers, this becomes especially obvious. There was a Khenpo who once told me, "You should say something to those monastics under you, otherwise it seems like the monastics think very highly of themselves," and immediately start giving all sorts of orders to the lay practitioners. This is really not good. One day a Khenpo came to me in a very aggressive manner and told me something. Later, I found out that there was indeed a bit of this going on. But there were also some people around who deliberately went to complain in front of that Khenpo. When their own mindset wasn't right, they would go and complain again. Actually, in this world, things are not always as simple as we might imagine them to be. There are countless intricate and complex relationships that exist. There are many connections that are hard to explain clearly. So in such a complicated society, we should still use our own more meticulous and profound wisdom to carefully analyze and understand things. You'll see that people are indeed different from each other. They may all look like people, but in reality, they're all different. So some people may look really very tall, but they become small-minded individuals because their hearts are very narrow, extremely narrow. Even the tiniest little thing, they can't tolerate it within their own world. Even just a word or a phrase, if you mention even a tiny bit of their faults, from that moment on, they will treat you like an absolute enemy, just a tiny little bit, and they possess a truly exceptional memory for this kind of thing. They simply cannot ever forget it. But when it comes to memorizing texts, or recalling scriptural or logical proofs, they simply cannot remember anything at all. But any small wrong you did to them, they will remember it forever, deeply engraved within their hearts and minds. But what we commonly call gentlemen or truly great people are those who leave an indelible mark. They won't waste time on these trivial matters, nor will they waste their valuable breath talking about trivial or insignificant matters. They consistently focus their attention on the truly significant and more profound things in life. This is an important principle that everyone should carefully consider and pay close attention to. Next, let's delve into and discuss the profound philosophy of Confucius. Confucius said, "Learning without thinking leads to confusion. Thinking without learning is perilous." We've actually used this before, in fact, in our classes as well. When we previously discussed the way of the Bodhisattva, we've cited these scriptural and logical proofs several times. So next, Confucius also, indeed, he put it this way. He said, "Learning without thinking." If we go and read books or study diligently under other experienced teachers, and after thoroughly learning, we don't deeply reflect on the profound meaning of what we've learned, then it's very easy to become confused and disoriented. Confused here means that although you study and listen every day, in the end, it seems like you haven't really thought about it yourself. If you haven't reflected at all, then in the end, it's as if you haven't learned anything at all. You will still easily become confused. On the other hand, thinking without learning means this person has a very rich imagination, constantly thinking and reflecting, but never actually studying, just caught up in their ideas' distinctions, never considering things are explained in the Buddhist scriptures, or how the treatises discuss them, or what Confucius or Yan Hui had to say about it. They simply don't study at all. Because any kind of knowledge we acquire, it has its own rules and must be truly learned. If you haven't studied this very kind of knowledge, it's indeed also dangerous. Here, when he says dangerous, he actually means that the person is truly entering a very dangerous situation. Thinking without careful studying is indeed extremely dangerous. Studying without thinking is also very confusing. These two concepts are just like what we often talk about in Buddhism, you see. First listening and contemplating, then practicing. Or if you only have the wisdom from hearing but not from contemplation, it's also in vain. So, is there any people up there on the 4th floor? Oh. Those who study without thinking and those who think without studying, both of these are indeed very significant and substantial problems. Why do we say this? If we study without truly thinking deeply about it, it all just becomes something from the books. This doesn't have much real significance. If you think without studying, if you don't even study, then even if you try to contemplate, it's not going to work. So between these two, there is a difference. Many great masters have talked about the importance of combining listening, contemplation, and practice. We should carefully listen and deeply contemplate at the same time, and then put it into practical application in our real lives. If we do this, it's very good. Otherwise, if you only think and do not actually study, arrogance can easily begin to grow within your mind. And if you only study without ever reflecting, then in the end, you merely fall into empty talk. What he is mainly pointing out here is the importance of combining both listening and contemplation, rather than separating the two. This is not reasonable. This includes when we give presentation in exams or when we are explaining something ourselves. Sometimes we might be speaking as we go, and by speaking, I mean that after hearing something, you can talk about it. But if you are just repeating someone else's words, if it's just a repetition, that's still not enough. You should think through every principle yourself. Contemplation is indeed very important, but this contemplation is not just your own random thoughts or idle speculation. This is what we call being an idealist or a fantasist. Especially now, in this current internet age, many individuals do not possess truly deep wisdom, but they go on to create many new names and new concepts, as well as new kinds of knowledge and theories. This is when they truly start to understand and internalize these complex ideas and frameworks, to create their own ideas and schools of thought. Actually, some people really do have the wisdom of someone like the omniscient, venerable Longchenpa, or the wisdom of Master Tsongkhapa. If you establish a school of thought, or claim to be from some particular tradition, others may see it as very meaningful and significant as well. But if we truly don't possess such essential abilities, and we just start relying on a very limited handful of specific terms and various bits of wisdom gleaned from the vast expanse of the internet, and then, in front of a great many people, begin to confidently expound all sorts of elaborate theories, some of these particular things are not very meaningful. It seems that in some ancient sutra it is wisely said, "It is indeed better to hear little, but to truly understand much. It is therefore better to hear less, but to deeply and thoroughly understand the profound meaning within its essence, rather than hearing a lot, but not understanding the meaning. It's often better not to hear a lot of information if you don't fully grasp the meaning at all." This should be from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. So in the process of studying, actually extensive learning is still very important. Even if you haven't studied extensively, it's very important to truly understand the actual and real meaning. So according to Confucius, he did not praise mere theoretical understanding, nor did he praise just practical cultivation alone. It is absolutely necessary to combine both theory and practice, for only then can things be truly grounded and firmly established. Otherwise, they will lack a solid foundation and remain incomplete. A great deal of knowledge may not actually be directly applicable. It all turns into empty talk on paper or castles built on ice with no real practical application in actual practice. So, in our profound Buddhist tradition, many aspects of listening, contemplation, and practice complement each other. Without listening, there can be no contemplation. Without contemplation, there can be no cultivation. However, cultivation must also be combined with extensive listening and contemplation to achieve real results. This perspective is indeed very reasonable and well-founded. Now let us proceed to discuss the next teaching. Confucius said, "To attack heterodox doctrines and deviant teachings brings nothing but harm." This may also appear to be rather simple. Confucius once again spoke of attacking heterodox views, which means to criticize or even reject teachings that are considered deviant or outside the proper tradition. Other sects that are distinctly different from your own established beliefs and practices, or even various other groups within society, if you choose to actively attack or vehemently reject them, you are creating division and conflict. Schools of thought different from your own, that is, those of others. Then in this particular case, such actions are profoundly harmful and incredibly damaging. There are actually several different interpretations of this particular situation, each with its own nuances. For example, we can say that if I'm just a Buddhist, then I start to actively attack religions other than my own, specifically those other than Buddhism, my personal faith, such as Islam or Christianity, for example, or Taoism and so on. This particular situation is actually quite harmful to me personally. This is certainly one particular way to interpret it. There is also, however, another possible interpretation. What I mean is that to launch an attack merely because something happens to be different is in itself already harmful. The real point being emphasized here is to ask very clearly what exactly should be the true object of attack. It is in fact those heterodox teachings that bring genuine harm, which in the end ought to be confronted and gradually made to disappear completely. There is also another way of explaining it. One may say, I must attack heterodox views. In this sense, I myself represent the central and primary discipline, while the so-called heterodox refers to other different branches or divergent lines of thought. I want to break it, but doing so can have truly harmful and significant consequences. However, prominent people like Nan Huaijin in the past, including the esteemed scholar Qian Mu, what they have said aligns perfectly with the third interpretation I just mentioned. It means that if I consider myself a devoted Confucian, then all other branches of thought and philosophical traditions outside of established Confucianism, I would need to completely eliminate them, otherwise they will undoubtedly be quite harmful to you and your well-being. This kind of view also exists to some extent, but it is not the main one, it is not the most important. The main one is myself, and the non-main ones should be cut off, otherwise they will be harmful to me. But as I just said, I personally think it should be understood that if you choose to attack or actively reject those who are outside of yourself, such actions will in fact inevitably prove to be quite harmful to your own well-being and overall state. This view is relatively reasonable. For example, if I am a Buddhist and I reject everything outside of Buddhism, not good for myself. If I am a practitioner and I can't stand other practitioners besides myself, if I criticize them every day, always talk about them, this is not beneficial to me. This is quite disadvantageous to me. Now, on the internet, there are some elderly old men who might be a bit muddle-headed and don't really know what's truly going on and are perhaps a little confused. And every day they're online talking about this and that. But they themselves have absolutely no principles at all, no established rules whatsoever. And in this particular case, as a result, everyone treats them poorly as well, even though he himself maybe has a small number of people who are similar to him, and there are some who follow him. But in reality, it's still not truly beneficial to him in any significant way. So, according to Confucius's profound view, in fact, we human beings live in this world to all those who are different from him. We must communicate very well, get along well with each other, as this will be truly and significantly beneficial to you. So, in our World Youth Buddhist Symposium, every single time there is a significant presence of both Christianity and Islam, including Confucianism, Taoism, and many other religions. There are also some modern, significant, scientific, more famous people. Everyone sits together, engaging in comprehensive and collaborative roundtable discussions, what we all truly have in common. At the same time, we also explain some key differences. But these concepts are neither completely unrelated nor entirely opposed. They're just showing some of their own distinct characteristics. In the past, the renowned physicists Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, over a period of more than a decade, each had their own unique and differing perspectives in the field of physics. They had significantly different ideas and engaged in some profound debates. But in the end, they both became a truly complementary force to each other, enhancing their collective understanding. Later, many complex and challenging problems in the field of physics were discovered. So whether it is any kind of place of practice or a particular location or any respected scholar, nowadays, some individuals, for their own personal interests, insist on making everything outside of themselves completely collapse or be utterly refuted. But actually, that's not a realistic perspective either, and in fact, it's also profoundly harmful to oneself. So here, the main point is, for example, our comprehensive and nuanced acceptance of the complex outside world is still very important. Take companies, for instance. In my opinion, of course, their advanced technologies are also relevant. But just talking about, for example, the smartphones that people especially like nowadays, in the very beginning, Nokia still held a significant and notable share of the mobile phone market. But at that particular time, they were completely unwilling to change their existing models, absolutely unwilling to cooperate with other entities, and it was even widely said that in some specific areas, they were quite resistant. They were rather resistant to other more modern technologies. Apple and some other companies were much more compatible and significantly more inclusive. Later on, in the competitive market, it seemed that prominent brands like Nokia and the like have basically disappeared now. Of course, there may be some other reasons for that as well. So whether it's any advanced technology, any particular sect, or any specific school of thought, we should not harbor feelings of jealousy and reject others. If you keep rejecting others, you might never be done with it. And with so many enemies, you would have to completely wipe all of them out. Just like it says in the Bodhicaryavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, this is quite difficult to achieve. So in this small world, everyone should be accepting. and embrace all the truly new and exciting things in the world, as well as all kinds of valuable and profound knowledge. If you walk alongside others with an open, accepting, and genuinely understanding attitude, then perhaps your own very existence will have a certain inherent vitality and a strong, enduring motivation. So as we live in this complex world, including some of our esteemed Dharma teachers, revered Khenpos and respected Khenmos, sometimes it seems that, except for their own class, they can't stand to see others' achievements improve. Of course, this is a very small minority. Most people probably do not typically have this particular issue. But if that is indeed the case, then during your entire teaching process, many of the numerous disciples who are below you will be exactly the same in their own minds. They will have the same mindset. So generally speaking, more than 90% of students' attitudes are brought to them by their teachers. If the teacher is jealous, then the students will also be jealous. Then the students will also reject all outside perspectives. The students will be the same way. I often think to myself, fortunately, our precious Dharma King back then had a very open-minded way of thinking. He was accepting of all religions in the world. He had a sense of inclusiveness. At the very same time, he also had his own firm principles and would not just change with others or follow others blindly. So it is essential that we need to have both inclusiveness and our own principles. In fact, the intended meaning here should also be understood in this way, for by doing so, one avoids bringing harm upon oneself. There ought to be such a teaching as well, and therefore we will now continue further. I'll just take a moment to see exactly how much time is still remaining. Next, the text says here, Confucius once famously said, do you understand what I have taught you? To know what you know and to acknowledge what you do not know. This is true wisdom and genuine knowledge. This particular concept seems to us in many ways to have been quite extensively covered and discussed a lot within the context of this course. Confucius also said the you here refers to Zhongyu. One of his disciples was also Zilu. It seems quite clear that Zilu was indeed 9 years younger than the esteemed Confucius, and he was also notably one of the 72 most prominent disciples of the great sage. At that particular time, Confucius and the entire cultural sphere of ancient China was situated mainly in regions that would correspond today to Shandong and Shanxi, as well as Luoyang in Henan, together with much of Hebei, which, if we were to look at the map of that era, would be clearly visible. At that time, China's territory was still very small. Back in the era of Confucius, during the spring and autumn and warring states periods, it was actually quite small. Later, it kept expanding and expanding until it became as large as it is today. At that time, especially now, why is it that now in the expansive Central Plains region, much like the revered land of Confucius and Mencius, Confucian thought is very prosperous? In places like Luoyang and Shanxi, Buddhist thought is also very flourishing and has a certain depth. This is still related to history to some extent. So, as for Confucius at that time, most of his disciples were primarily from the region of Shandong. This includes, as we previously mentioned earlier, prominent figures such as Mencius, Zhuangzi, and Laozi. Indeed, many of these influential thinkers were originally from that very area. The culture there must have been truly prosperous indeed. Even now, after they have arrived there, deep within their very bloodline and within their ancestral memory, the echoes remain. There is a feeling that's a bit different from others. Every time I go to the Shandong area, their deep and enduring connection to Confucian thought still holds a certain remarkable strength, deeply embedded in the cultural fabric of the region. When you go to Shanxi and those places, there is a distinct difference in Buddhist culture as well, reflecting unique historical developments and philosophical traditions. It's completely different from many other places. So at that particular time, Confucius spoke to his disciple Zilu, who was also called Zhongyu, and said this to him. He said, "Have I taught you about knowing? The character Ru has the 3 dots of water on the left. That day in our Udana Sutra, there was also a character with the 3 dots of water, but later some people wrote it as the Ru in Ruguo, if. But this Ru with the 3 dots of water means you, although sometimes it's still written as the character for Nu. When reading, there are also cases where it's pronounced as Ru. That's also possible. Some versions, including the original Dunhuang manuscripts, have the character with the 3 dots of water in excavated texts. So at that time he said that he was giving Zilu instruction regarding certain aspects of knowledge and understanding, and it was in that very context that Zilu was being addressed. He might have been asking what exactly it means to know and what it means not to know, and the way he posed the question was rather unusual, while in the Tibetan translation it was expressed somewhat differently. If we were to put it into the Tibetan language, it seems like this is the case, and actually the fundamental meaning remains the same. He famously said, knowing is knowing. What is knowing? Knowing is just knowing. What is not knowing? Not knowing is just not knowing. This is called knowing. It does seem that some young people nowadays have their reasons for not liking Confucianism. Knowing is knowing, not knowing is not knowing. So what does that mean? In our logic studies, there are some certain fundamental things. It's a bit similar to this. Knowing is knowing, not knowing is not knowing. What exactly does this mean? Knowing it, not knowing it, we don't really understand it. But actually there is some meaning to it here, because when it comes to Zilu, he was a rather upright and truly honorable person. He certainly wouldn't pretend. He wouldn't pretend to fully understand what he genuinely didn't. He would never do that. When it came to things he knew, he would earnestly and clearly tell others, this is what I know. And for things he didn't know, he wouldn't pretend and say, oh, I genuinely know this. I've thoroughly studied this. Nowadays, some political leaders often tell outright lies. They haven't studied it at all, not even a little bit. They say, I studied this, I approved this, or I signed off on this at the time, I'm especially familiar with it, even though many people clearly know that it absolutely wasn't them who signed it. They still tell others, if it's something good, I signed off on this. If it's something bad, I don't know about this. I've never seen it before, but what Confucius meant was, what is knowing and what is not knowing? At this point, if you truly know, it comes from your own wisdom. Truly understanding yourself in this particular way, being completely clear and fully aware, this is precisely what is called knowing. If it's something that you genuinely don't know at all, but you truly think you know it, then that is indeed a kind of profound delusion. Knowing means knowing in this way. So then, what is not knowing? If you don't know whether it's about the whole phenomenon, its classification or its definition, you have no idea, or you only have a partial understanding, maybe you know a part of it. There are cases like this too. You might know half of it, but not the whole thing. This is called partial understanding. It seems to be like this, but in reality, as an upright and honorable person who strives to do what is right and just, if during a debate you can't win the argument, you follow the other person. This is a standard for the wise. This is what it means. So, if we know something with certainty, then we know it. This is because in our daily lives, throughout our entire lifetime, there are actually many things we simply do not yet fully comprehend or understand. If you don't know something, there's really nothing laughable about it. Zhuangzi also said in the past, my life has its limits, but knowledge has no limits. He meant that my entire life is finite, and there are so many profound things I still don't fully know or comprehend. A person's wisdom and energy are also inherently limited, and this is a fundamental truth. So what's so funny about not knowing something? There's really nothing funny about it. Back when His Holiness, in our Journey to the West memoirs, when we had just arrived at the first stop, His Holiness said, I remember when he talked about the 5 perfections, he spoke about the perfection of the teacher. When it came to the perfection of the teacher, His Holiness said that everything else was very good. The time was perfect, the Dharma was perfect, the environment was perfect, and the companions were perfect as well. And then, when His Holiness talked about the perfection of the teacher, he said, today the perfection of the teacher is me, the speaker, but although I started teaching the Dharma at the age of 14, and my understanding of the Dharma used to be quite good. But now, because of my age, at that time His Holiness was 60 years old, and he said, now my eyesight isn't very good either, and my health isn't that great. So as for the Dharma, since that's the case, when it comes to the politics and technology of various countries and other aspects, I really don't know much at all. And even in Western countries, I don't really understand many of the dietary traditions and customs. So as I'm speaking, if there are some unreasonable points, I hope everyone can be understanding. When His Holiness first went to Western countries, he embarked on a significant journey. He never claimed that he understood everything in the world, or that he had complete and unobstructed knowledge of everything. He never made such grandiose statements. So as people, if you know something, you know it, and if you don't pretend that you do. There's nothing wrong with admitting you don't know. Even Lao Tzu once said, "To know that you do not know is best. If you already know, then you certainly know it yourself and understand. And if there are things you don't understand, that is the style of a noble person. If you say, 'I don't understand this,' admitting you don't understand is actually very noble. Not truly knowing that you don't know is indeed a fault. If you don't realize that you don't know something and still pretend that you do, then you truly have a significant mental problem. You genuinely don't know, but you still act as if you do. And that's really unreasonable." There was once a great master in the West who began teaching the Dharma to people there. The reporters started deliberately because these reporters intentionally tried to find faults and said things like, "People say you are such and such an incarnation. You must know a lot, so why do you say you don't know?" He replied, "There is much that I don't know. And as for this treatise I'm teaching now, there are some parts I don't understand. If there are parts I don't understand, let's set them aside. We'll talk about the parts we do understand. If I understand them later, I'll explain them to you." Later, the reporter said, "Wow, his academic rigor and his integrity were truly exemplary. He wasn't trying to fool anyone, nor did he ever claim in front of his students that he was something he wasn't." We've encountered this before as well. Some history teachers, some physics or geography teachers, for example, would often misinterpret many fundamental concepts themselves. For example, when we used to work with numerators and denominators in general mathematical calculations, you simply can't just arbitrarily add and subtract everything together, and you certainly can't use them together when solving complex equations. But some teachers had no idea about this at all. Yet in front of others, in front of me, they would act especially, and since we were just students sitting below, we would think ourselves, the teacher made a mistake, but we didn't dare say anything. Because what if the teacher got upset? It could definitely affect our future prospects. Fortunately, someone else eventually noticed the issue. There was a teacher named Teacher Mei Duo who discovered it. He observed that all of the students' submitted homework assignments were incorrect. Then he asked which particular students possessed the most exceptional academic grades, and the teacher responded accordingly as well. When he went to check theirs homework, also wrong. Later, as he gradually looked into it, he began to understand the situation more clearly. He found that the entire class's homework was all wrong. Of course, as for some teachers, maybe they have their own educational backgrounds and such, and it's possible to make mistakes occasionally. But that teacher was probably a bit bolder. He would just casually fool the students. And when he taught, he did it with such remarkable confidence. He would often talk about which school he had graduated from and how truly great his academic grades were. He would talk about what exams he took when he was young, and how he once honorably served as the esteemed secretary of the Youth League branch, and so on and so forth. But later on in our own lives, when it comes to academic matters, there are some individuals who are very rigorous in their approach and methodology, and there are some who are not. Take Socrates, for example. Everyone in the modern world knows about the Western philosopher Socrates, who is also known as the king of philosophy. He once said, "The only thing I know with certainty is that I know nothing." He was very humble. What did he say he knew? He said he understood nothing at all. This is his best saying, and it's very famous in the West. He said, "If I know anything, it's that I know nothing." Because when it comes to all the things that can be known in the world, a person's wisdom is indeed still limited, and one can't possibly understand all knowledge. So this is a very fair and a very profound and philosophical conclusion. So, in the future, if we truly know something, we can confidently count it as genuinely knowing, and if we genuinely don't know, then we should honestly admit that we simply don't know. Generally, we say, to know what you know and to admit what you don't know. It seems like this is nothing special, something everyone understands. But if you really look for its meaning, in our lives, if you treat what you know as not knowing and what you don't know as knowing, then that's a bit unreasonable. So even in academic circles in the past, many thoughtful people have reflected deeply on this particular saying, considering its implications and historical context. We also hope that we can still know what we know and admit what we don't know. That is true knowledge. This is quite interesting. It sounds like when we translate it into Tibetan, it seems a bit too simple. But in fact, there is a great deal of meaning contained within it. I hope that everyone will think deeply about this. All right, we will stop here for today.
Bandara Banma Sodargye